Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I trust you can all hear satisfactorily. Excellent. Nobody said not, so I hope take that as a yes. Delighted that Sarah is with us here again on stage. Sarah Keith Lucas, David Richardson of Sustained by Coryton, and Guy Lachlan of the HCVA, actually based here. And we're going to be talking a little bit first about sustainability, climate change, etc. And then we're going to throw it over to questions from the floor about general XK matters. So, Sarah, if I may, we'll start with you. One or two questions, if I may. This is very much your subject, of course. The world has globally warmed only 1 degree centigrade.
Yeah.
This does not sound very much. What are the impacts we're seeing due to this warming, please?
So we have, humans have warmed our climate by about 1.1 Celsius since the pre-industrial era. And in the words of our Greta Thunberg, the science has been crystal clear for over 30 years. So in 1990, the International Panel on Climate Change conducted some research that said we are now absolutely positive that humans are warming the climate because of the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we're emitting. So 1 degree doesn't sound like much on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, we wouldn't really notice the difference between 8 or 9 Celsius outside, for instance. But 1 degree can be a real threshold temperature for certain things in our atmosphere and environment. For example, the freezing or melting point of water, +1 and 0 makes a huge difference. Hence why we're seeing more and more of our glaciers, ice sheets and sea ice melting year on year, and our sea levels rising by around about 3 centimetres every decade. So we're continuing to push up not just temperatures on a global basis, but it's that melting of ice, the warming of our oceans, and coral reefs, for instance, very, very sensitive to very slight changes in temperature. And of course, it's not the same across the world. So the Arctic region is warming around about 3 times faster than the rest of the world. So we may have only averaged a degree in warming, but that's enough to tip us into extreme weather, increased likelihood of things like floods, droughts, the very wet winter that we've just seen here in the UK. Can all be attributed to that 1 degree rise in temperature.
Thank you. Why is the Paris Agreement, which was to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, why is that so important? Are we on track to achieve that?
Okay, so the Paris Agreement of 2015, most of the countries around the world came together to agree that we would limit climate change to 2 degrees, but best efforts to keep it at 1.5 degrees Celsius. You know, we're not too far off that, we're already about 1.1 degree. Now, there's no kind of threshold temperature at which the world will run into off-the-scale climate change and drastic effects, but obviously the lower we can keep that temperature rise, the better. And the International Panel on Climate Change did a big bit of research about 5 years ago to try and look at the difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature and 2 Celsius. And it's found that actually the impacts on humans as a species, as well as our environment, are much, much higher at 2 degrees. So we start to look at risks of destabilising our food security and things like that at 2 degrees warming. Whereas if we can peg back our carbon emissions and keep the temperature rise to about 1.5 degrees, we should be able to stave off the worst, most dangerous impacts of climate change for humans. Are we on track for it? Well, short answer is no. As a global population, we're not. With our current best efforts around the world, we're probably looking at a rise in temperature about 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. So, no, we're not on track, but the more and more countries that come on board and start to set the example. Actually, the UK is doing pretty well in terms of sustainability and climate change compared to a lot of other countries around the world. But we just need to continue to show that example and lead the way in our sort of our journey towards net zero, which we're hoping to be at by 2050.
So what can we do?
Okay, what can
climate
we,
change?
that's the big question, isn't it? What can we all do? Well, it's all about reducing our impact on the world, so less waste and less consumption, really, as individuals and as companies. So reducing, recycling, repairing, which I think that's a very good example of with some of these old cars, the prime example of repairing and reusing, long lifespans, less kind of throwaway waste. There's the obvious things like flying less regularly, driving less regularly, eating less meat and dairy as well is a huge step towards reducing our individual carbon emissions. And thinking about investing money, are the banks we're keeping our money in, are they green banks? Our investments, are they with sustainable green companies? Where we invest our money, and talking about it. Talking about your views about sustainability and climate change, much like we're doing today, talking to our peers and people in government and power, and to continue that conversation and inspiration of all the things we can do. So.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. David, bringing you in. Guy. Sorry. I'm now called Guy, David, or David Guy. Bringing you in, what are the HCVA doing about this? What is your take on all of this and the classic or historic vehicle world?
Yeah, thanks. The HCVA, for those that don't know it, stands for Historic and Classic Vehicles Alliance, and it's a trade organisation that a group of us started 3 years ago with the aim of representing the historic and classic professional world to government and legislators and regulators to make sure we're not accidentally made extinct by people over-regulating us out of existence, which we're doing quite successfully. We've got about 120 companies as members now. If you have a company, you're not a member, see me afterwards. But we believe there's a really strong message to do with the environment and historic motoring in general. Not only, as Sarah said, the cars themselves are great examples of the preservation and helping things to be used to have a longer service life, which is very environmentally friendly, but also in terms of the way that we can, as a group of individuals, enthusiasts and trade, we can for once take the lead in terms of alternative fuels. So particularly sustainable liquid fuels. If you want to keep your car in its original state and continue using it, it's essential that we have a source of sustainable liquid fuels, and that's where David comes in and his company, and thankfully others. So that we can have the prospect of genuinely sustainable drop-in fuels. That means we don't have to throw away the engine or gut the running gear. We can keep the car more or less exactly as it was built, maybe improve it with fuel injection, as some of our members are doing, to make it more efficient, but largely keep it exactly as it left the factory. And that's where, for once, as I say, the historic vehicle industry can take the lead and say, actually, we're ahead of the normal modern car industry for a change. So we've got, for example, here at Bicester, some of you might have seen the country's first fuel pump dispensing sustainable fuel. And that only exists because of users and owners of these cars who are prepared to dip into their pockets, obviously, but are prepared to stand up, take the lead, advertise the fact that these vehicles are being run sustainably, on top of their sustainability credentials because of their long service life, makes for a really powerful story.
Thank you very much indeed. David, we are all very much looking forward to sustainable fuel. It's crucial for all of us if we're going to enjoy our cars, obviously ongoing for a few more years. But of course it's very expensive at the moment. Are we going to get volume? This is the crunch, isn't it? Are we going to get sufficient volume, as with anything else, that when it becomes mass market, as it were, the volume, the price tumbles? Is that going to happen? And any clues as to when?
That's sort of answers the $1 million question. That seems like $1 million question. Is it going to get cheaper? There will always be economies of scale to help bring pricing down. Is it ever going to be on parity with oil-based products? I think the simple answer to that is really low. And quite frankly, we have to be honest with it. It's a slightly contentious issue for me to bring up as well. We have effectively an abundant free energy resource in oil. we've spent the best part of 160 years optimising our refining practices to make that particularly efficient and cost effective for us. And we've sort of got used to it, and we kind of sort of, it's almost a bit like a drug that we've all got a little bit addicted to, and to sort of wean yourself off that is a very difficult job. Where we come with sustainable fuels, I think where we're coming from is that we're looking at certain segments of society that can be the early adopters, that Guy's referring to, that can help sort of drive some of the improvements, the efficiencies, the economies of scale, that will help bring things down. Now, there are some technologies that may well get there that gets closer to parity with oil costs, but we need a lot of support from policy, there's legislation, the incentives that are currently there. And to give you an example, I've just said this to people in the past, at the moment there are schemes out there that if I take a biomass and I put that into a power station to charge an electric vehicle, I can get lots of credits, lots of incentives for doing that. If I take that same biomass and put it straight into an internal combustion engine, I don't get anything at all. In fact, I'm getting penalised these days. So we need a much more holistic approach to policy from those that are doing advising, and thankfully we are trying to do that now, to say, look, you've got to treat all the technologies out there with equal, put them on a level playing field. And that's where I'm going to get to. But yeah, is it going to be as cheap as oil? I'm not convinced it will be, but it's something we must be doing anyway. As I said, sustainability unfortunately doesn't come free, but there are certainly those early adopters that have the means to help us get there at least.
Thank you. Well, I think that's very interesting. Thank you very much for your contributions on the subject. I'm certainly feel better informed. I hope that's true of many of us here this afternoon. So it's been great having you with us. It's very appropriate and important we tackle this subject, this aspect, if we're going to be responsible owners and businesses involved in the oil car world, and that is obviously what we want. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.